In this video, we're going to talk about how Conor McGregor essentially confirmed the rumors of what is going wrong with him returning to the UFC and why it might mean he might never return to the UFC. Conor McGregor has been doing a ton of interviews to promote his new Roadhouse movie that's going to be coming out. And during these interviews, it's become very apparent that Conor McGregor might be taking a ton of cocaine or Adderall because he is just yapping away nonstop. And in one of these interviews, he let slip a little bit of information that pretty much confirms what the hell has been going on with McGregor and why we haven't seen him return to the cage in such a long time. We're going to play that clip in this video, okay? So let's go all the way back, right? Just to clarify real quickly, okay? There has been so many rumors about Conor McGregor when he's going to return, and they all started with this sort of USADA time period. I'm sure we're all well aware of that. Back when Conor McGregor was meant to be fighting Michael Chandler right after the season of Tough. He was meant to get into this USADA pool. He never did. Eventually, he was meant to get in September. He was meant to have the fight in December. Then there were going to be fights for early January. Then he was going to fight at UFC 300. And even then, the 6-month period for him to enter USADA, it came, it went. USADA itself, it came, it went. January came, it went. December came, it went. UFC 300 got announced. That's gone. Now we're starting to look at International Fight Week. There's still no confirmation for Conor McGregor, and it all seems to be what the hell is going on. And these rumors have started to percolate that it is because of the contract negotiations that are going on with Conor McGregor and the UFC. And in this clip, Conor essentially confirms what these rumors have been saying. He lets it slip in just one little sentence, but they are essentially the crux of the situation. You see, where we find Conor McGregor today and where we find the UFC today is a very, very critical moment for the UFC, okay? Conor McGregor re-signed his contract when he went and fought Khabib, right? And during that time period, when he went to re-sign his contract, there are things in the UFC contracts called sunset clauses, which means after a certain period of time, the UFC contract will sunset and that contract will end, and that fighter essentially becomes a free agent. This is exactly what Francis Ngannou found himself in when he left the UFC to go and find opportunities elsewhere. Now he has ended up signed to the PFL and a free agent in boxing. Conor McGregor has seen this, and Conor McGregor has confirmed that he has 2 fights left on his contract in this Roadhouse interview. Check this out.
To getting back and regressing, you know, resetting and recalibrating and mapping my return to the octagon. I'm eager for that. You know, we're in the first quarter of 2024.
Yeah. There's
still a good chunk of the year left. I've got 2 fights left on my contract. Negotiations are ongoing. So when the promotional work of the movie comes to an end, when the St. Patrick's...
That little sentence right there, I've got 2 fights left on my contract, is essentially everything. That is everything. And why is that? Because the UFC like to do negotiations with their fighters and sign them to generally, for the bigger fighters, 7-fight deals before they fight out their contracts. They like to re-sign them to 7-fight deals. They were trying to do this with Francis Ngannou. They were trying to do this with Nate Diaz. They successfully did it with Masvidal. They've just recently successfully done it with Alex Pereira, and they successfully did it with John Jones. Essentially, they want to keep a UFC fighter locked into their UFC contract for as long as possible, so that way they can keep pushing them forward and keep pushing that sunset clause out further and further and further. With Conor McGregor having 2 fights left on his contract, that means he could have very easily fought twice this year, or in December last year and once this year. That is why Conor McGregor keeps giving us these, I've got plans to fight 2 or 3 times per year. He keeps coming out and putting pressure on us, the audience, to demand the UFC to go ahead and make those fights. Now, Dana White and the UFC have been pushing back, and Dana White has been saying, Conor McGregor's got too much money. Conor McGregor doesn't need the money. What Dana White is saying is we are offering Conor McGregor a contract to fight. We are offering him a contract, but it has got another 7 fights attached to it. Conor McGregor has got so much money, he doesn't want to sign that contract that we're giving him. That is what Dana White is saying. When Dana White is saying Conor McGregor's got enough money, what he's saying is he doesn't want to sign the contract that we're giving him. And the contract that the UFC are going to be giving him is going to be an extended contract over 7 fights. Now, why is this such a critical period? Why is this happening right now? Because as this is coinciding, where Conor McGregor has 2 fights left on his contract, as he himself has confirmed, that is no longer a rumor. As that is happening, it is the last year on the ESPN deal for the UFC. The UFC need to go forward and renegotiate their contract with ESPN, or go ahead and sell themselves to some other bidders, say like Netflix, who have now recently gotten involved in the fight game, signing Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Companies like ESPN pay the UFC a flat fee for each pay-per-view. They essentially pay them for, I think it's like the first 350,000 sales, 400 sales, but they essentially pay them a flat fee for each pay-per-view. Now imagine if you're the UFC and you're going into that contract negotiation and you're trying to project the future fights that you have coming up or the future sales that you have coming up. You can either do that with the sport's biggest star, Conor McGregor, or you could have that negotiation without the sport's biggest star, Conor McGregor. And that is what the UFC are looking at to the end of the year. Now, if Conor McGregor's sunset clause is set for 2025 or 2026, that means the UFC can enter that negotiation room with ESPN or with Netflix and still technically have Conor McGregor on their books. But if Conor McGregor goes and fights twice this year and doesn't re-sign with the UFC, then they enter that negotiation without Conor McGregor on the books. And we could be talking about millions of dollars worth of difference to the bottom line of that sale. Now, here's where things get interesting for Conor McGregor's side. If it is a sunset clause on his contract and he does just have to sit out until 2025 or 2026, that's not such a big deal for Conor McGregor. In the UFC, if you want to win a UFC title, the optimum age for that is around 30 to 33. We've started to have this conversation where you can't really win a UFC title after 35 if you're in the weight classes below 170. However, in the world of the fight game, when it comes to making money, well, we've seen with all these retired fighters doing their boxing fights that you can go on all the way up until 45. Now, Conor McGregor, he has got plenty of time to sit out, wait for his sunset clause to lapse, exactly like Francis Ngannou did. And then the world is his oyster. He has been going over to Saudi Arabia during the Jake Paul fights, during the Francis Ngannou fights. He's been sitting there in the front row, talking to everyone, doing business deals, and there is a world of opportunity in front of him. There is Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3 in MMA, but not in the UFC. It could be completely funded by the Saudis. It could be completely paid for by Netflix. And instead of the UFC taking all the profit of Conor versus Nate Diaz 3, Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor could get a far larger payday just for that fight outside of the UFC. And if you think Dana White wants that fight to happen outside of the UFC, you do not know Dana White at all. Of course, Dana White is going to be doing everything he can to hold on to Conor McGregor for as long as possible. Then, of course, there is Conor McGregor pumping himself full of steroids again and fighting Jake Paul. Imagine if that fight happens at the PFL at a one-off. Jake Paul is signed to MMA and in the PFL. What if Jake Paul doesn't fight in the PFL until 2025, 2026? Conor McGregor becomes a free agent in 2025, 2026, and Jake Paul has his debut fight in MMA in the PFL against Conor McGregor. Can you imagine? These are the things that are going on behind the closed doors right now. McGregor's team can sit there and look at the next 3 or 4 years and look at the current contract they have with the PFL. And UFC can sit there and look at the current contract they have with Conor McGregor and see, holy shit, what are we going to offer Conor McGregor? How much do we have to pay him to keep him here? And the thing about the UFC is they are a profit business. They are not going to pay Conor McGregor more than he is worth to them. How much revenue can a fight with Michael Chandler really get? How much revenue can a 4th fight with Dustin Poirier really get? Conor McGregor's money-making opportunities are no longer in the UFC, and the UFC knows that. All they are trying to do is keep Conor on the books long enough so they can walk into that negotiation room with ESPN or Netflix when this deal is over and say, we still have the sport's biggest superstar signed to us. And all Conor McGregor is trying to do is wrap up this contract as quickly as possible. Whether he fights Chandler, Poirier, fucking John Jones. Conor McGregor doesn't care. He wants those fights knocked out as quickly as possible so he can move on and chase bigger fights somewhere else. The Saudis are already saying they're happy to pay for a Conor McGregor versus Manny Pacquiao boxing fight. What does this mean for Michael Chandler? It means Michael Chandler is just sitting around waiting for the UFC and Conor McGregor to sort this shit out. And Chandler could be sitting there until Conor McGregor's contract sunsets. If I was Michael Chandler, I would be jumping off the Conor McGregor train immediately, because Donald Cerrone already came out and showed the world there is no such thing as a red panty night. There might be if Conor McGregor demands the rematch. I'm sure Dustin Poirier got paid a really nice little fee for his third fight with Conor McGregor. You know, when Conor wants something, then that gives the person opposite Conor a little bit of negotiating power. But when it's just, hey, step in the ring and fight Conor McGregor, why should the UFC pay their opponent more? And Donald Cerrone already showed us that he got paid his regular flat fee for that. Michael Chandler is starting to age out of the UFC lightweight division. And if he wants to have a long-lasting legacy, he needs to get himself back in there right now. And there is a perfect contender for Michael Chandler to fight. That's Mateusz Gamrot. Michael Chandler should fight Mateusz Gamrot as quickly as possible. He has a great style to handle Gamrot's grappling. Gamrot is on a sick winning streak in the lightweight division. Plus, he is horrible for lightweight. Who the fuck wants a wet blanket at lightweight? Chandler can handle that. And a win over Gamrot puts Chandler right there in the conversation with Poirier, Gaethje, the winner of Oliveira versus Sarukian. It's nicely heated up. There's plenty of moving parts at lightweight, and Chandler can slot himself right there in that division again, because there is no reason to think that the UFC are going to allow Conor McGregor to fight out his contract before they go and re-sign with ESPN and Netflix. Maybe after that deal is done, but who knows how long those negotiations would take. That could be waiting until the middle of next year for Michael Chandler. He needs to move on with his career now before he too ages out. And he will age out before Conor McGregor will go broke. There you have it. Conor McGregor may never fight in the UFC again. Seriously, he might just choose to sit out, wait out his contract, let it sunset, and then go fight Jake Paul, Manny Pacquiao, Nate Diaz 3 at a private event. There is all the reason in the world for Conor McGregor to just simply wait for this contract to sunset. If the UFC don't offer him his next two fights, Conor McGregor will just sit out. There's a very, very high chance that we never see McGregor in the UFC ever again. Let me know down there in the comments, what do you think should be next for Michael Chandler? If you were him, what decision would you make next? If you were Conor McGregor, would you jump back in as quickly as possible? Would you re-sign with the UFC? Or would you just sit around and wait for the contract to lapse? If you enjoyed this video, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. And of course, I will see you all in the next one.